During the Daddy and Me festival, Destiny felt a pang of sadness as she watched her friends play with their fathers, while her older sister was still working long hours at a small diner just to make ends meet. Teased by other kids as the girl without a dad, she clutched a crumpled $5 bill, believing what a friend had told her, that a nearby toy store could sell anything. Amid the bright, bustling store, she stopped in front of a man with a cold expression and innocently whispered, "I want to buy you to be my dad." The heartbreaking words left the anonymous billionaire speechless. As he looked into the longing eyes of the little girl, he had no idea that this moment would change both of their lives forever. Before we begin, this is a fictional story written to inspire and uplift. At Memory Stories, we believe the right story at the right moment can change everything. The bell above the door chimed at exactly 12 minutes past 10 on a Saturday morning, and Mark Sullivan didn't look up right away. He was standing near the back wall of his flagship store, Sullivan's Toy World on Garfield Avenue, with a small notebook in his hand and no interest in being recognized. That was the whole point of these quarterly walkthroughs. No advance notice to the staff, no entourage, just Mark in a plain blue button-down and jeans watching how the floor actually ran when nobody thought the boss was watching. The store was doing what it always did on Saturday mornings. Parents moved through the wide aisles with the focused energy of people who had limited time and children with very specific opinions. A boy near the building blocks was conducting what appeared to be a serious negotiation with his father. Two little girls argued cheerfully over the same stuffed rabbit near the plush display. A grandmother worked slowly through the puzzle aisle, reading the backs of boxes with her reading glasses pushed up on her nose. The air smelled like new plastic, and the cinnamon candles someone had put near the register for fall. Mark made a note about the signage near the craft supplies. Too high for kids to read on their own. He'd bring it up with the floor manager later. He was still writing when the quality of the room changed. It wasn't a sound. It was the absence of sound, gradual and spreading the way a hush moves outward from its source, the way a ripple crosses still water. The boy by the building blocks stopped mid-sentence. The two girls with the rabbit turned. The grandmother looked up from her puzzle box. One by one, without any signal passing between them, the people in the store shifted their attention toward the front entrance. Mark followed their eyes. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Small even for 6, with two braids pulled tight and tied with yellow ribbons that had faded from washing. Her dress was printed with small flowers, freshly pressed, but worn thin at the hem, sitting an inch higher than it was probably supposed to. Her shoes were scuffed at both toes. She stood just inside the entrance with her chin up and her dark eyes moving carefully around the room, not the way a lost child looks frantic and searching, but the way someone looks when they have made a decision and are in the process of carrying it out. In her right hand, she held a small fistful of money, a crumpled $5 bill, and some coins pressed together so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Mark watched her scan the room. He watched her eyes move past the registers, past the other customers, and settle on him. He didn't know why she chose him. Maybe it was because he was the only person in the store standing still. Maybe it was something in his face. Later, much later, she would tell him it was because he had kind eyes, and that he reminded her of a photograph of her grandfather she kept in a shoebox under her bed. She walked straight to him with the unhesitating purpose of someone who has come a long way and is not going to lose her nerve now. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was small, but it didn't shake. "Are you the man who decides what gets sold here?" Mark looked down at her. "Something like that," he said. "Can I help you?" She held the money out toward him on a flat palm, like an offering at the end of a long journey. "I want to buy a daddy," she said. "I have $5.37. Is that enough?" The store had already gone quiet. Now it went perfectly still. The kind of still that happens when a room full of strangers collectively understands they are witnessing something real. Mark Sullivan had built his company from a single rented storefront when he was 26 years old. He had sat across the table from investors who tried to dismantle him, had weathered downturns and supply chain crises and a global shutdown that nearly broke everything he'd built. He had learned over years of hard practice to keep his face neutral when he was caught off guard. He could not keep his face neutral now. His throat went dry. He crouched down slowly until he was level with her eyes, his notebook hanging forgotten at his side. Up close, he could see that her dress had been ironed carefully, that someone had taken time with her braids that morning, that despite the worn shoes and the faded hem, she had been sent out into the world as neatly as love and limited means could manage. "What's your name?" he asked. "Destiny," she said. "Destiny Washington." "Destiny." He said it carefully, the way you say a name you want to hold on to. "Can you tell me a little more about what you're looking for?" She considered him for a moment, apparently deciding whether he was trustworthy enough for the full explanation. He must have passed whatever test she was applying, because she took a breath and began. "Today is the Daddy and Me Festival," she said. "It's at Lincoln Park, right next to here. All my friends are there with their daddies. They do the relay race and the three-legged race, and at the end they give out ribbons." She paused for just a moment. "My mommy and daddy both went to heaven 2 years ago. My sister Jade takes care of me, but she has to work today. She works at the diner on 5th Street. She couldn't get time off." Another pause. "I heard Maya at school say that this store sells everything, that you can buy anything here if you have enough money. So I thought maybe." Her eyes dropped to the coins in her palm, then came back up to his face. "I know 537 probably isn't very much, but it's everything I saved." Mark Sullivan had lost his own father when he was 8 years old. A heart attack on a Wednesday afternoon, while Mark was sitting in his third-grade classroom, working through a page of long division. He remembered the principal coming to the classroom door. He remembered his teacher's face changing in the moment before she turned to tell him. He remembered the drive home with his aunt, how the trees outside the car window looked exactly the same as they always had, and how that had seemed wrong, how the world should have looked different when something that important had been taken out of it. He remembered being 9 and 10 and 11, watching other boys' fathers show up to things. Little league games, school plays, parent-teacher nights where his mother came alone and smiled at the other parents with a smile that cost her something. He remembered the father-son fishing derby at the lake near their house, which his mother had taken him to anyway, just the two of them, and how she'd caught more fish than anyone, and how they'd both laughed, and how, underneath the laughing, he'd felt, with the helpless precision of a child who doesn't yet have language for grief, the exact shape of what was missing. He had never told anyone that in the week after his father's funeral, he had emptied his piggy bank onto his bedroom floor and counted every cent he owned, trying to figure out if it was enough. It wasn't a memory he'd examined in years. It lived behind a door he'd kept firmly closed, one of those sealed-off rooms that a person builds when they have survived something and needed to move forward. He hadn't thought about that boy on the bedroom floor for a very long time. Standing here in the middle of his store, looking at this small girl with her crumpled money and her chin held up and her absolute faith that if something was needed, you went and found it. Mark felt that door swing open like it had never been locked at all. He opened his mouth. The front door burst open with a jangle of bells, and a young woman came through it, moving the way people move when fear is right behind them. She was wearing a uniform from Romano's Diner, pale blue shirt, and dark pants, a white apron still tied around her waist. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had come half loose from running. She was breathing hard, and her eyes swept the store with the rapid, desperate focus of someone who has been imagining the worst for the last several blocks. "Destiny." Her voice carried relief and terror in the same breath. "Destiny, where are you?" "Jade." Destiny turned and waved from where she stood beside Mark. "I'm over here. I'm buying us a daddy." The young woman stopped. Her eyes moved from her sister to the money on Destiny's palm, to Mark crouching beside her, to the silent ring of strangers who had watched all of it. Mark saw her take in the scene the way a person takes in something they were hoping not to see. Confirmed. Then she crossed the store in a dozen quick steps and went down to her knees and pulled Destiny into her arms. "Baby," she said, her face pressed into Destiny's hair. "I just wanted to help us," Destiny said quietly, her voice muffled against her sister's shoulder. "I know you did." Jade's voice was steady, held in place by effort. "I know." She held on for a moment that stretched longer than it was. Then she stood up still, holding Destiny's hand, and looked at Mark. She was 20-something, he guessed, with dark eyes that were both tired and sharp, the eyes of someone who had learned to read rooms quickly because she'd needed to. She was beautiful in the way that has nothing to do with effort and everything to do with the quality of attention a face carries. "I'm so sorry," she said. Her voice was composed now, pulled back into place. She didn't mean any harm. She was just trying to. She didn't cause any trouble, Mark said, straightening up. She was very polite and very clear about what she needed. We have to go. Jade was already turning, already moving toward the door. I only have 20 minutes before I have to be back. Of course, Mark said. Destiny looked back at him, over her shoulder, as they walked away. She gave him a small wave, just the fingers. He raised his hand in return and watched them go, the young woman in her diner uniform and the small girl with the yellow ribbons moving together through the Saturday morning crowd and out through the door into the October light. He stood in the middle of the quiet that settled back over his store and looked down at the glass counter beside him. At some point during their conversation, Destiny had set her money down. It was still there. $5.37 arranged with the careful precision of someone who wanted to make sure it didn't roll away. Mark picked it up. He stood there, holding it in his palm for a long moment, feeling the weight of it, which was almost nothing, and the weight of everything it meant, which was considerable. Around him, the store gradually resumed its Saturday sounds, children and parents, and the low background music from the speakers overhead, and he stood in the middle of all of it, holding a little girl's savings, and thinking about sealed doors and what lives behind them when you finally let them open. Beth, he said to his assistant, who had appeared somewhere nearby. Yes. Cancel my afternoon. You have 4 meetings this afternoon. Cancel all of them, he said, and didn't move from where he was standing for another several minutes. Jade's alarm went off at 4:25 every morning, though she was usually awake before it. Her body had adjusted to the schedule, the way bodies do, when you give them no alternative, and most mornings she was lying in the dark by 4:15, doing the arithmetic that had become as automatic as breathing. Rent on the 1st, electric on the 15th. Destiny's school shoes were getting tight again, her feet growing with the cheerful indifference of children to the cost of things. The back burner on the stove had started cutting out intermittently, which she was managing by planning meals around the front burners and hoping it held through winter. She would get up at 4:25, dress in the dark so she didn't wake Destiny, and be out the door by 4:50 to catch the bus downtown. The first job was cleaning. 3 hours in a 40-story office building on Commerce Street, vacuuming carpets, and wiping down glass conference tables, and emptying wastebaskets in offices where people made decisions that affected thousands of lives. She was finished and gone before most of them arrived. The invisibility of it used to bother her in the early months, that she could move through these spaces and leave them cleaner than she found them, and never be seen by the people who used them. She had made her peace with it. Invisible work was still work, and the check cleared the same as any other. The second job was Romano's Diner on 5th Street breakfast and lunch, starting at 8:30. She liked it there, more than the math justified. The regulars knew her by name, Harold, who came every Tuesday and Thursday for the same eggs and wheat toast, and always left a folded 5 on the table, regardless of the bill. Betty, the head cook, a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s, who had raised 4 children on her own, and who dispensed practical wisdom with the same efficiency she applied to everything else. The construction crew from the building going up on Jefferson loud and good-humored, and tipping better than they probably should. The third job was 4 to 10 at Riverside Grocery, stocking shelves in the evening. It was the one she liked least, not because of the work itself, but because of what it cost her. By 4 in the afternoon, after 11 hours already on her feet, she was running on something that wasn't quite energy anymore, more like the memory of it, the ghost of the morning's reserves. She moved through those evening hours with the mechanical competence of someone who has learned to function past the point where functioning feels voluntary. Destiny went home from school with Mrs. Peterson on the 3rd floor, a retired schoolteacher who had taken to the arrangement with genuine warmth and charged them less than she should have. Jade brought her a tin of cookies every other week and tried not to think too hard about what she would do without her. On the night after the toy store, after Destiny was in bed and the apartment was quiet, Jade sat at the kitchen table and spread out the bills. She did this once a month, laid them out by due date and added the numbers and figured out what could be paid in full and what had to wait. It was never a good exercise, but she had found that looking directly at things was better than the alternative, better than the low-grade dread of numbers you'd chosen not to examine. The medical debt from her parents' accident was $47,000. She had been making payments of $200 a month, which meant she would finish paying it off somewhere around the time Destiny graduated high school, assuming nothing else went wrong in the meantime. The rent increase was coming in January, $90 more a month, which was $90 she didn't currently have available. She moved the numbers around the way you move pieces on a board when you're trying to find a configuration that works, and found, as she usually did, that the configuration that worked required things she didn't have. She looked up from the bills and noticed the drawing on the refrigerator. Destiny had brought it home from school earlier in the week, taped it up herself, proud of it. 3 figures holding hands in front of a building with a yellow sign. One had long hair. One was small, with 2 circles at the top of her head, braids rendered in crayon. The third was tall with short hair, and there was no label on it. But Jade knew who it was meant to be. She had not said anything about the drawing. She wasn't sure what she would have said. She thought about the man in the store, the way he'd gone down to Destiny's level, without any self-consciousness about it, as though crouching on the floor of his own flagship store to talk to a 6-year-old was a perfectly reasonable thing for a grown man to do. She had expected walking through that door and seeing the situation, the particular brand of pity that well-meaning people perform when they encounter something that makes them uncomfortable. The careful, slightly embarrassed kindness that is more about the giver than the recipient. She had not expected whatever was actually on his face in that first unguarded second before he'd gotten control of it. She didn't have a name for it. It had looked more than anything like recognition, like someone who had heard a familiar sound from a very long distance. She folded the bills and went to bed. She lay in the dark for a while, listening to Destiny breathe in the other bed across the room, that slow and even sound that was the best thing she heard all day, and thought about recognition and what it meant when a stranger's face looked like that. In the morning, during her break at Romano's, Betty poured her a coffee without being asked and leaned against the counter with the particular expression that meant she'd noticed something. "You look like you've got something sitting on you," Betty said. Jade wrapped both hands around the mug. "Destiny went to the toy store yesterday while I was at work," she said. "The big one on Garfield. She asked the man there to sell her a father." Betty was quiet for a moment. Outside, a truck went by. The coffee machine at the end of the counter made its usual sound. "She had $5.37, Jade said. "She'd been saving it." "Lord," Betty said softly. "The whole store was watching. I had to go get her, and I was standing there in my uniform with grease on my apron, and—" Jade stopped. Started again. She wasn't trying to make trouble. She was trying to solve a problem. That's the thing. That's exactly what she was doing. "That's what you do," Betty said. She learned it from somewhere. Jade looked at her coffee. "I need to go apologize to the man. She bothered him in his own store in front of all his customers." "Honey," Betty's voice was level and direct the way it always was. "That child did not do one thing wrong. She saw a need and went to address it. That is not something that requires an apology. It's embarrassing." "For who?" Betty asked. "Not for her. She wasn't embarrassed. She was trying to take care of her family." She gave Jade a steady look. "Same as you do every day before the sun comes up." Jade went on her lunch break anyway. She walked the 6 blocks to Sullivan's Toy World and stood outside for 10 minutes, watching families go in and out carrying bags of things that cost more than she made in a shift, and then she pushed through the door because she was not a person who stood outside of things she had decided to do. She found the customer service desk and waited behind a woman returning something in a large box. And when the clerk asked how he could help her, she said she wanted to speak with whoever was in charge, that her sister had been there the day before, that she was there to apologize. The clerk's face changed in a way that told her the story had already made its rounds among the staff, and he picked up a phone, and 5 minutes later, she was on an elevator going up to a floor that felt like a different world. Before we go further, if this story is already sitting with you, take a second to like this video and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. There are people all over the world listening to this right now, and somehow that feels right for a story like this one. Mark Sullivan's office on the 40th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the whole city, and he had long since stopped looking at them. When he was 26 and running the first store out of a rented space on Garfield with 2 employees and a lease, he had to think carefully about every month he used to imagine what it would mean to have an office like this. the height of it, the sense that you could see far enough ahead to plan. Now he had it, and he sat mostly with his back to the windows, working through reports that told him in detailed numerical language how well things were going, which was very well by every measure he had learned to apply, and which left him more often than he'd admitted to anyone feeling like a man, standing in a large and perfectly appointed room with no particular reason to be there. He was 38 years old. Sullivan's Toy World had grown from that first storefront into 12 locations across 4 states, with a corporate headquarters and a distribution center, and a staff of several hundred people who were good at their jobs. He had been profiled in business publications and invited onto boards and asked to speak at conferences about entrepreneurship and growth. He had more money than he could spend in 2 lifetimes, and a house with 5 bedrooms and a yard, a service kept neat that he rarely walked in. He had been married briefly in his early 30s, a relationship that had ended without bitterness, but also without the kind of grief that comes from losing something irreplaceable, which had told him something about the nature of that relationship that he hadn't fully understood until it was over. There was one personal item on his desk, a photograph tucked to the side near the lamp, where visitors wouldn't necessarily notice it. A man in work clothes, smiling broadly, his hand on the shoulder of a small boy, at a groundbreaking ceremony. The man was James Sullivan, construction foreman, husband, father dead at 39 of a massive heart attack on a Wednesday afternoon, while his son was sitting in a 3rd-grade classroom, doing long division. The boy was Mark, age 8, 3 months before his world changed, in a way that nothing after it ever quite changed back. Mark had built Sullivan's Toy World, as among other things a tribute. His father had possessed the quality that Mark considered the most valuable thing one person could give another: genuine presence. When James Sullivan was with you, he was entirely with you, no part of him elsewhere, no sense of waiting for something more important. He had made young Mark feel like the most significant person in any given moment. And then he had died at 39, and Mark had spent the 3 decades since trying to recreate that quality at scale, building a company that sold toys, which was to say, a company that sold parents the occasion to sit on the floor with their children and pay attention. He had believed for a long time that this was enough, that doing good indirectly at the comfortable distance of commerce and scale was a reasonable way to spend a life. The encounter with Destiny Washington had introduced some doubt about this theory. He was still at his desk the following afternoon, ostensibly reviewing the 3rd quarter numbers, when Beth knocked to say that a Jade Washington was asking to speak with him. He told her to send her up and spent the 30 seconds before she arrived trying to look like a person who had not spent the last 24 hours thinking about her sister's face and a sealed-off room in his memory. Jade came in looking like someone who had prepared for something unpleasant and was not going to give it the satisfaction of undoing her. She had redone her ponytail. She was still in her diner uniform. She stood in the doorway and took in the office with a quick cataloging look, the kind that prices things automatically, and then met his eyes with an expression that was politely unrevealing. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, "I wanted to apologize in person. My sister came into your store and bothered your customers, and I'm sorry for that." "She didn't bother anyone," Mark said. "Please sit down." "I only have 30 minutes." She sat. He looked at her across the desk. She looked back with the direct, slightly guarded gaze of someone who has learned to be careful about easy kindness from people who have no particular need to be kind. He understood the gaze. He'd encountered it before in business, the wariness of people who have been on the receiving end of generosity that turned out to have conditions. "Destiny told me about your schedule," he said. 3 jobs. Something moved briefly in her expression. "She talks a lot. She told me you're the best sister ever," he said. "Smart and pretty, and you take care of her all by yourself." She said it like it was the most obvious fact in the world. He watched her jaw tighten slightly, the way it does when something hits closer than you were expecting. "She's very proud of you." Jade looked down at her hands on her knees. "She shouldn't go bothering strangers," she said, but the firmness had gone out of it. "She wasn't bothering me," Mark said. "She reminded me of something." He paused, surprised again at his own candor. "Something I'd managed to forget for a long time." Jade looked up. "What did she remind you of?" He thought about it honestly, the way he found himself wanting to be honest with this particular person. That some things don't go away just because you stop looking at them, he said. That you can build a very large and successful thing and still be missing something you haven't named. She held his gaze and he had the distinct impression she was deciding something. I should get back, she said. Before you go. He stood as she did. I have a business proposition, if you're willing to hear it. She stopped, looked at him with new attention. What kind? He kept his voice businesslike, because he understood instinctively. That was the register she needed. Not sentiment, not charity, dressed up as something else, but a straightforward case for a straightforward exchange. He told her about the position he wanted to create, director of community programming for the flagship store. Someone to build events and activities for families who didn't always feel like stores like his were built for them. He told her his reasoning, which was that the people he'd hired for these kinds of roles before had come from backgrounds that made them good at designing programs and poor at understanding who the programs were actually for. When he finished, she said this would be charity, not accusing, just naming it plainly the way you name a thing in order to examine it. It would be a salary, benefits, and flexible hours, he said, with the expectation that you'd build something real. If it turns out to be charity, you can quit, and I won't argue with you about it. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside his windows, the city moved in its indifferent afternoon way, traffic and pigeons and the distant sound of a siren going somewhere. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. After she left, Mark sat back down at his desk and looked at his father's photograph for a while. He thought about the way Jade had looked at his office when she walked in, the quick, instinctive pricing of things that people do when they've spent a long time knowing exactly what things cost and what they don't have. He thought about Destiny holding out her palm full of coins, with the absolute certainty that the right thing to do when you needed something was to go find it and offer what you had. He thought about the difference between doing good at a distance and doing it up close, where you had to look at the actual face of the thing. He picked up the phone and called his HR director and told her he needed a new position created by end of week. Jade called him 3 days later and said she'd take the job quickly, the way people say things they've decided and need to say out loud before the deciding undoes itself. He said he was glad and told her to come in Monday morning. She said okay and hung up. Monday came with October light, pale and clean, falling through the big front windows of Sullivan's Toy World in long rectangles across the floor. Mark was already there when Jade arrived, standing near the entrance in jeans and the blue shirt she was beginning to recognize as his off-duty uniform, holding 2 coffees from the small cafe they'd recently added near the back. They walked the store together in the quiet, before opening, and he watched her see it differently than anyone he'd walked it with before. She wasn't looking at square footage or traffic flow or merchandising logic. She was looking at it the way a child's parent looks at a space, asking what a kid would feel standing here, whether they'd feel invited or overlooked, whether the store was communicating that it was for them or for the people who bought them things. She stopped in an alcove near the children's books that was currently being used for overflow storage, a natural hollow in the store's layout, sheltered on 3 sides, the right size for a cluster of low chairs and a reading rug. She stood there for a moment with her head tilted, looking at it with the expression of someone who has been imagining something for a long time and has just found the space where it fits. Story time, she said. Saturday mornings, Wednesday afternoons for the after-school crowd. Low chairs, good lighting, the kind of space where a shy kid can sit at the back and still feel part of it. She looked at him. Not a performance. Just someone reading to kids who want to be read to. He took notes. She moved through the store with the thoroughness of someone who had been thinking about this for years, without knowing she was doing it. A craft corner where children could make things while their parents browsed. A homework station with decent chairs and good light somewhere for kids to settle after school while a parent finished a shift. A birthday shelf with prices labeled clearly and honestly, so a parent on a careful budget didn't have to guess what was reasonable and what would embarrass them at the register. You've been thinking about this, he said. I've been thinking about what I wished existed, she said. I guess that's the same thing. In the 3rd week, Destiny started coming to the store after school. This had not been formally arranged. It happened because Mrs. Peterson had a doctor's appointment on a Thursday, and Jade mentioned it in passing, and Mark said she could come here And so she did, backpack dragging behind her, arriving at 3:15 with the barely contained energy of a child who had been sitting still all day and intended to make up for it comprehensively. She did her homework at one of the tables Jade had set up, offered unsolicited opinions about the book selection, the quality of the crayons in the craft corner, and the general layout of the stuffed animal section, which she felt could be improved. She told Mark on that first Thursday that his handwriting was hard to read, but his voice was good for stories, that she had lost a tooth the previous week and felt the $2 from the tooth fairy was fair, though she had heard of higher, and that the dragon book in the picture book section was the best book in the store, and possibly the world. Mark found himself on those Thursday afternoons doing something he hadn't done in a long time, which was being entirely present in a moment without any part of him planning for the next one. He would sit across from Destiny at the small table while she worked through her homework, and he would help when she asked, and watch her think when she didn't, and the hour would pass before he'd noticed it going. He was also increasingly aware of Jade across the room during those hours, the particular quality of her attention when she was working the way she moved through the store, with the efficiency of someone who had never had the luxury of wasted motion. He was aware of it the way you're aware of weather, not as a distraction, but as a persistent background fact, the kind of awareness that locates itself in the body before the mind has sorted out what to call it. One Thursday afternoon, Destiny presented him with a folded piece of paper. Inside was a crayon drawing 3 figures holding hands in front of a building with a yellow sign. One figure had long hair, one was small with braids, the third was tall. "That's you," Destiny said, pointing to the tall one. "I can see that," Mark said. "What are we doing? Being a family," she said in the tone of someone explaining something that should not have required explaining. Then, with the unnerving directness that certain children possess like a superpower, "Do you want to be in our family?" The store moved around them, children and parents and the ambient sound of Saturday retail. Mark looked at the drawing for a moment that stretched out longer than it should have, and then looked at Destiny, who was watching him with total and patient seriousness. "I think that's something I'd want to talk to your sister about," he said carefully. She considered this procedurally and found it acceptable. "Okay," she said, "but I already decided yes on my end. I just wanted you to know." That evening, while Destiny finished a worksheet on weather patterns, Mark was more aware than usual of Jade reorganizing the book display on the far side of the room. He was doing his best to appear focused on the worksheet, and doing a middling job of it. "Mr. Mark," Destiny said without looking up from her page, "are you going to say something to her, or are you going to keep making that face you make?" He looked at her. "What face?" "The thinking too hard face." She filled in a blank. "Jade says when I make it, I need to just do the thing instead of thinking about it anymore." Mark looked across the room at Jade, who was entirely absorbed in alphabetizing picture books, and had no idea she was being discussed. He looked back at Destiny, who had returned to her worksheet with the serene expression of someone who has delivered useful advice, and is confident it will be taken. "She's usually right," Destiny added, in case that was in question. The boardroom at Sullivan Group headquarters was designed in the language of serious money, dark wood and high ceilings, and the kind of chairs that communicated importance through mild discomfort. Mark had sat at the head of this table for 10 years, and had never felt as surveyed as he did on a Thursday morning in November, when 11 people sat across from him, with the particular expressions of people who have coordinated their concerns in advance. Margaret Calloway, his lead investor, sat to his left. She was in her late 60s, silver-haired and precise, the kind of person who had been in enough rooms to have lost all patience for performance. She had known Mark since the beginning, had written the first significant check, and had the standing that came with that. "We need to have a frank conversation," she said, which in Mark's experience meant a conversation that had already been had among the people currently looking at him and was now being delivered as a finished product. He nodded and waited. She laid it out efficiently. His attendance at strategic planning sessions had been inconsistent, 3 missed meetings in 2 months. His time allocation at the flagship location was disproportionate to its share of revenue. He had created a new senior position and filled it with someone who had no professional background in retail or programming development, restructuring other roles to accommodate the hire. He had been observed attending a school fundraiser on a Thursday afternoon during what was scheduled as a board preparation session. The community programs are generating strong numbers, Mark said. Return visits are up 22% at the flagship. Average time in store is up nearly half an hour per family. Those are leading indicators for the kind of customer loyalty that doesn't show up in one quarter. We've seen the numbers, said Thomas Reed, the CFO, younger than Margaret, and sharper, in the specific way of someone who has made a career of saying the thing others are thinking. What we haven't seen is a coherent plan to translate those results into the other 11 locations. What we've seen is significant investment in one store and one position. He paused. A position created for a specific person who came to your attention under circumstances that were, let's say, unusual. Jade Washington is exceptional at her job, Mark said, keeping his voice level. This isn't about her competence, Margaret said. It's about yours, about your judgment. She leaned forward slightly. Mark, an executive developing a close personal connection with an employee he first encountered through an emotionally significant event, providing that employee with benefits and flexibility unavailable to others, restructuring the organization around her presence. That's a pattern that creates risk, for the company and for both of you. The room was quiet in the way of rooms where something true has been said and everyone is waiting to see how it lands. I want to ask you something directly, Margaret continued, and her voice had lost the boardroom edge, was something closer to genuine. Is some part of this about your father? The question sat in the room. Mark looked at her for a long moment. This is a business meeting, he said. I know it is. She didn't back down. I've known you for 12 years. You built this company after your father died. You've spent those 12 years bringing joy to other people's children because you couldn't fix what happened to yours. And now there's a child without a father and a young woman who is exhausted and doing everything alone, and you've given her a job, and you're going to school events on Thursday afternoons. She held his eyes. I'm not saying you're wrong to care. I'm saying you need to be clear with yourself about what you're doing and why. Because if this goes wrong, it goes wrong for all of you. The meeting lasted another hour. The board was not in a position to move against him. He owned too much of the company for that. But they were watching, and they were worried. And some honest part of him understood that they were not entirely wrong to be. He drove to the flagship store after the meeting because it was the only place that felt like solid ground. He found Jade in the craft area, cutting paper into neat squares for an afternoon workshop focused and unhurried, the particular competence of someone who is good at their work and knows it without needing to perform it. She looked up when she heard him come in, read his face in a second. Board meeting, she said. Board meeting, he confirmed. He sat down at one of the small tables which were built for children and made him look faintly absurd, and she didn't comment on this, but he caught the corner of her mouth move. He thought about telling her everything Margaret had said, about the careful concern and the pointed questions, and the way the room had felt like a mirror he'd been walking past without looking into. He decided against it, not because it wasn't her business, but because laying it on her felt like using her to process something she hadn't asked to carry. Instead, he said, "How's the origami project coming?" She looked at him for a beat, reading something in the question that he hadn't put into words. Then she slid a piece of paper across the table. "Fold it in half," she said. "Diagonal." He folded it. She corrected the crease without commentary, just reached over and sharpened it with her thumbnail. He folded it again. Over the next 15 minutes with her patient and occasionally exasperated instruction, it became something that was approximately a crane, if you were being generous with your definitions of approximately. She held it up and examined it from several angles. "Not bad," she said. "For a first try," he added. "I was going to say that." He looked at the imperfect little paper bird. "I don't give up easily," he said. He was not talking about origami, and they both understood this, and neither of them said anything about it, which was its own kind of conversation. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen, and something in her face changed the color going out of it quickly. She answered it, listened for 10 seconds, said she'd be right there, and hung up. "It's the school," she said. Destiny collapsed at recess. They think it might be her appendix. Mark was already standing. "I'll drive," he said. The emergency room at Riverside Children's Hospital had the particular quality of all emergency rooms: the fluorescent flatness of the light, the recycled air, the low, persistent sound of a building that never fully sleeps. Mark drove because Jade's hands weren't steady enough for keys, and she spent the ride with her hands pressed flat on her thighs, and her eyes on the road ahead, not crying, not talking, doing the thing she did when she was frightened, which was go very still and very focused. She held herself together through the intake forms, through the triage assessment, through the conversation with the pediatric surgeon, who explained in the calm and competent language of someone who has delivered this particular news many times that Destiny had appendicitis, that surgery was necessary and would happen that evening, that the procedure was routine and the outcomes were very good. The surgeon left. The waiting room was just the two of them, and the sound of the ventilation system and a muted television in the corner, showing a home improvement show with the sound off. Jade sat down in a plastic chair. She pressed both hands flat on her knees and breathed slowly, through her nose, the deliberate kind of breathing you do when you are managing something rather than feeling it. Mark sat beside her. He had found a vending machine down the hall that produced something in the approximate category of coffee, and he brought her one, and she took it without looking up. They sat together in the particular intimacy of a hospital waiting room, which strips away most of the social architecture that normally structures how people sit near each other, and waited. She looked back at me, Jade said after a while. Her voice was quiet and steady, held there by effort. Right before they took her through the doors. She was scared, I could see it, but she was doing the thing she does where she keeps her face calm. So I won't worry. She paused. She's been doing that since she was 4 years old, making herself brave for me. She loves you, Mark said. I know. Jade looked down at the coffee cup in her hands. She shouldn't have to do that, though. She's 7 years old. She should be able to be scared without managing how it lands on other people. You're allowed to be scared too, he said. Right now, in this moment, you don't have to manage how it lands on me. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted. Not opening exactly, but the careful, held-together quality, relaxing slightly, like a fist unclenching by one finger. They sat through another hour of the waiting room's particular timelessness, the way time in hospitals loses its normal texture and becomes something elastic and strange. A family on the other side of the room came and went, their crisis resolved. A father came in looking like he was holding himself together with both hands, and left 40 minutes later, looking like he'd been given something back. Somewhere around 1 in the morning, Jade's head came to rest against Mark's shoulder. He didn't think she intended it. He sat very still and didn't say anything, and after a while, her breathing slowed into the rhythm of someone who has been running a very long distance and has finally been given permission to stop. The surgeon came out at 2:15. The operation had gone well. Destiny was awake and asking for ice cream, in terms that the surgeon described as emphatic. Jade exhaled so completely, her whole body shook with it. Then she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and stood up and moved toward the doors. And Mark followed her, and when they found Destiny in the recovery room, propped up against pillows, with a hospital bracelet on her small wrist, and the slightly unfocused look of a child still working through anesthesia, Destiny looked at the two of them standing there together and said with groggy satisfaction, "Good, you're both here." "Suz." Jade took her daughter's hand and pressed it to her cheek, and Mark stood at the foot of the bed, and the room was very quiet, and he understood with the clarity that sometimes comes at 2 in the morning in a hospital, that whatever he had been telling himself about appropriate distance and professional relationships had become extremely difficult to sustain. The bill came on a Tuesday. Jade opened it at the kitchen table before work, still in the clothes she'd slept in. She read the number 3 times the way she read things she needed to be sure of. $12,000 her portion after insurance. $12,000 that she did not have and had no immediate clear path to getting. She put the envelope down, washed. Destiny's cereal bowl, got dressed, and went to work because that was what you did. 4 days later, a notice arrived from the hospital's billing department. The balance on her account was 0. Paid in full. She sat at the small desk in the back room she used as a foundation office and read it 3 times the way she'd read the original bill. Then she picked up the phone. Mark answered on the second ring. She asked him directly, and he told her directly yes, he had paid it. And then he started to explain, and she said quietly that he hadn't asked her. "I know," he said. "I should have, but..." "You didn't ask me," she said again, not loud, just steady. You made a decision about my family without asking me, and you used your money to do it, and I understand you meant it as kindness. I believe you meant it as kindness. But what it felt like from where I was standing was a reminder of exactly what the difference is between us, of exactly who gets to make decisions and who doesn't. Silence on the line. I have been holding my family together for 2 years, she said. I have worked before dawn and after dark, and I have been tired every single day, and I have done it because it was mine to do, and I was capable of doing it. What I need from you is not to have my problem solved. What I need is to be treated like someone who can handle her own life. That's not what I was trying to communicate, he said. I know. Her voice was tired now, not angry, which was in some ways harder to hear. But meaning well and doing right aren't the same thing, and I need some time to figure out where I stand. She paused. I can't keep working at the store right now. Not until I've sorted this out. He asked her not to quit. She said she needed time. She hung up. She sent the resignation letter that evening. She sent a money order for $12,000 the following week, which emptied her savings to under $200, and which she could not afford, and sent anyway, because it was the only way to make the situation hers again. If you've ever had to choose between your pride and accepting help, you know exactly how Jade feels right now. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that asking for the right kind of help isn't weakness. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time, because the best part of this story is still ahead. 2 weeks passed. Jade went back to Romano's. Betty gave her the morning shifts without questions or commentary, which was its own form of grace. Destiny went back to Mrs. Peterson's after school. The life they'd had before reassembled itself around them, with the bleak efficiency of lives that have been arranged for survival. And it fit. It had always fit, but it fit differently now, the way a room feels different after you've briefly had more furniture in it. Destiny didn't ask about Mark for the first week. In the second week, she started to once and stopped when she read Jade's face. On a Thursday, she came home from school and said without preamble, I saw Mr. Mark outside school today. Jade kept her eyes on the stove where she was making dinner. Did you? He came to check on me about my surgery. A pause. He looked sad, like the kind of sad that's been there for a while. Another pause. He said he made a mistake. He said he hurt your feelings and he didn't understand why until afterward, and now he does. She set her backpack down on a chair. I told him a real sorry has to have the why in it. Like not just I'm sorry, but I understand what I did wrong and I'm not going to do it again. Mrs. Coleman says that's what makes an apology an actual apology, instead of just a feeling. Jade turned from the stove. Destiny. He asked me what he should do. I told him. She was straightforward about this in the way of someone who saw no reason for it to be complicated. He's not a bad person, Jade. He just didn't understand something about you. And now he does. People can learn things. Jade looked at her sister for a long moment. Sometimes it's more than just hurt feelings, she said. I know. Destiny pulled out her homework folder with the matter-of-fact air of someone who is not finished making her point, but understands the conversation has reached its natural pause. But you're not scared of hurt feelings. You're scared of something bigger than that. She looked up. Probably he is too. Jade turned back to the stove and didn't say anything. She thought about what Destiny had said for the rest of the evening, while they ate, and while she helped with homework, and while she sat at the kitchen table after Destiny was in bed. The familiar bills spread out in front of her again. The familiar arithmetic. She thought about it the way you think about things that have located a true thing in you and won't let it go. She had spent 2 years being the person who didn't need anything, who managed and handled and figured it out, who kept her chin up in the lobby of a 40-story building in a borrowed blazer and asked point blank whether she was being offered charity. She had built that version of herself out of necessity, and she had come to rely on it the way you rely on a structure you've spent years reinforcing, not because it was comfortable, but because it held. The question she was avoiding was whether it was the only way a structure could be built. Mark spent the first week doing exactly what the board wanted. Every meeting attended, every report reviewed, every strategic conversation had with his full and undivided professional attention, and all of it tasting like something that had been left out too long. He had the specific hollowness of a person who is doing the right things for the wrong reasons, and is honest enough with himself to know the difference. He had lunch with Robert Thatcher, his attorney, on a Wednesday. He told Robert he wanted to set up a foundation before the food arrived. Robert set his water glass down and listened while Mark laid it out. A foundation for single-parent families, specifically those who had lost a spouse, modeled on the principle of partnership rather than charity. Emergency funds for medical crises, childcare assistance, job training. The people who went through the program would sit on the advisory board. The decisions would be made by people who understood from the inside what was needed, not by donors making informed guesses from the outside. This is because of Jade Washington, Robert said. It's because of a lot of things, Mark said. My father died when I was 8. My mother worked herself to the edge for years, keeping us stable, and she did most of it alone because there wasn't a structure for people in her situation. There was charity, which came with a particular weight to it. There wasn't partnership. He looked out the window at the street. I've been running a toy company for 12 years, and I've given a lot of money to things from a safe distance. I think it might be time to do something closer in. What do you want to call it? Robert asked. Mark thought about the photograph on his desk. The man in work clothes, with his hand on a small boy's shoulder, smiling at a groundbreaking. The James Sullivan Foundation, he said. After my father. He went to Romano's on a Friday evening, carrying the foundation documents in a manila envelope, and the awareness that he had been standing on the sidewalk outside for 12 minutes, which was longer than it had ever taken him to walk into a difficult negotiation. He went in, because he was not a person who stood outside of things he had decided to do, which was something he had in common with Jade and with Destiny, and which he found himself thinking about as he pushed through the door. Jade was wiping down tables at the back of the room. She looked up when the bell chimed, recognized him, and resumed wiping the table. He walked toward her and set the envelope down on the clean surface beside her cloth. I'm not here to offer you anything, he said. I'm here to ask for something and to say I'm sorry. He kept standing, because sitting felt like an assumption he hadn't earned. Not a I meant well sorry. I understand what I did and it won't happen again sorry. She looked at the envelope. What's in it, he told her. The foundation, the structure. The charter he and Robert had spent a week getting right. The principle at its center, that the people who needed help were also the people best positioned to shape how it was given. That the language of charity was the wrong language for what he wanted to build. I want you to run it, he said. Not for me. The salary is set by an independent board. You have full authority over program design. I provide the funding, but I don't direct the work. He paused. I know I don't have the right to ask you to trust me. I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking you to look at what's in that envelope and tell me if you see something worth building. She opened it. She read slowly, turning pages with the thoroughness she brought to everything, and he stood and waited and did not rush her. Betty came out of the kitchen at some point, drying her hands on a dish towel, and looked at Mark with the clear-eyed assessment of someone who has seen every type of person walk through a diner door. He stood up straighter, without meaning to. He's the one who made you cry, she said to Jade. He is, Jade said, without looking up from the documents. Betty looked at him for a moment. You going to do it again? No, ma'am, he said. She looked at Jade. Up to you, honey, she said, and went back to the kitchen. Jade set the last page down. She looked at him with the direct assessing gaze that he had come to understand was not wariness exactly, but attention, the careful attention of someone who could not afford to misread a situation. Destiny told me what you said to her outside the school, she said. She's a better teacher than most people I've paid for the same service, he said. The corner of Jade's mouth moved. Something in her posture eased by a degree that someone who didn't know her well might not have noticed. I need a week to read through everything properly, she said. And if I have changes to the structure, we talk about them before anything gets filed. Whatever you need, he said. I mean it, she said. If I come back to this, I come back as a partner, not as someone you're taking care of. I know, he said. That's what I'm asking for. She looked at him for one more long moment, the kind of look that is finishing a calculation. Then she nodded once, and he left, feeling like someone who had handed something important to exactly the right person to hold it. The James Sullivan Foundation opened its doors in the spring. Jade ran it the way she ran everything thoroughly, and without waste, arriving early and staying late, and making decisions with the particular confidence of someone who knows the territory from the inside. The charter had been revised 4 times before filing to get the language exactly right, and she had initiated 3 of those revisions herself, each one sharpening the principle at the foundation center that the people receiving help were also the people shaping how it was given that dignity was not an add-on to the program, but its architecture. By the end of the first quarter, they had assisted 31 families, emergency medical funds, childcare subsidies that let parents work without the constant arithmetic of childcare cost against wages, job training stipends for people who needed to move into work that could actually support a family. 3 women from the first cohort had started a cooperative childcare arrangement between themselves that was now serving 12 neighborhood families at a cost none of them could have managed alone. A man who had gone through the job training program had enrolled 2 other men from his building in the same program the following month. The help was replicating itself, which was the sign that it had been built correctly. Mark came by the foundation office when invited and kept his distance when not, which was the arrangement they had negotiated without explicitly negotiating it. He brought coffee sometimes. He stayed longer than he meant to sometimes. He was careful, and she noticed that he was careful, and he noticed that she noticed. And this was its own kind of ongoing conversation, conducted entirely without words. Destiny, who had started coming to the foundation office on the afternoons Jade worked late, had opinions about the pace of this conversation. "You're still making the face," she told him one afternoon. She was 7, now had been for 2 months, and had, if anything, grown more direct with age. "I'm not making a face," Mark said. "You absolutely are." She did not look up from her homework. "Have you told her yet?" "Told her what?" Destiny gave him the look of someone who is willing to have this conversation, but would prefer not to have it repeatedly. "Mr. Mark, I'm working on the timing," he said. "You have been working on the timing," she said, "since approximately forever. At a certain point, working on the timing and not doing the thing are the same thing." She turned a page. "Also, she makes the face too, in case that information is useful to you." He asked Jade to dinner on a Tuesday evening in April directly, and without preamble, telling her he had things he wanted to say that were not about work, and asking if she'd hear them over a meal. She said yes in the same direct way, and he took her to a place on the east side of the city, small and honest good food and tables, far enough apart for a real conversation. They talked about Destiny, who had decided she wanted to be a marine biologist, and had filled the apartment with library books about cephalopods and deep-sea geology. They talked about the foundation, a family, who'd recently completed the program, and sent Jade a letter she still carried in her jacket pocket. They talked about his father, which he almost never did, with anyone, about who James Sullivan had been, and what it had meant to lose him at 39, and what shape that loss had taken over 30 years of living around it. She listened, the way she listened to everything with her full attention, and without hurry, and he understood as he talked that this was the quality he had been trying to describe when he said his father had been present. It was what Jade did. She was entirely in the room. "When Destiny walked into your store," she said after a while, "she had it completely fixed in her head that it was a place where you could buy anything. That's what Maya told her, and she believed it without question, because she needed it to be true." She looked at the space between them on the table. "When I walked in after her and understood what she'd done, the only thing I felt was embarrassed. I was so focused on what it looked like that I almost missed what it was." "What was it?" he asked. "Her trying to take care of us," Jade said. "The same way I've been trying to take care of us. She just hadn't learned yet that some things can't be purchased." She looked up at him. "Though I think she knew it couldn't actually be done. I think she just needed to try." "She reminds me of someone," he said. Jade looked at him steadily. "I've been scared," she said, "since close to the beginning. Not of you exactly. Of wanting something I'm not sure I'm supposed to want. I spent a long time being the person who doesn't need anything, who handles everything alone. Needing something felt like it would break something. And now," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the restaurant window, the street moved in its ordinary evening way, people walking by with the particular purposeful looseness of a city in spring. Then she said, "Now I think Destiny might have been right about something she said a long time ago, that being scared together is probably better than being scared alone." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She looked at his hand. Then she turned hers over and held on, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the restaurant moved around them, and it was enough. The Daddy and Me Festival came back around the following October. Lincoln Park on a Saturday morning. In the particular clear light of fall, the same breezy energy balloons in red and blue tugging at their strings. The relay race course being set up by volunteers in yellow shirts, families arriving with camp chairs and thermoses, and children running ahead of them across the open grass. The same park, the same festival 1 year later, the whole thing carrying the weight of what it had set in motion. Destiny was wearing a new dress, dark blue with small white flowers. Bought new, not hand-me-down or thrifted, because they could do that now. Buy a dress for a festival without the purchase, requiring a calculation. Her braids were fresh tied with white ribbons that Jade had done that morning at the kitchen table, while Destiny narrated her competition strategy in detail. "Relay race first," Destiny said, "because that's the one I've been working on. Then the three-legged race. Then the ring toss, because I've been practicing my aim with the hoop in the hallway, and Mrs. Peterson asked me to please stop. Then ribbons. Then lunch," Jade said, finishing the second braid. "Then ribbons again if they give second-round ribbons," Destiny amended. "Do they give second-round ribbons?" "I don't think that's how ribbons work," Jade said. Destiny considered this. "Then I'll win enough in the first round," she said. Mark met them at the park entrance. He was in jeans and a gray jacket that Destiny had told him when he showed it to her looked like a real person's jacket and not a businessman's jacket, which she had meant as a compliment. He was holding 2 coffees and a small paper bag from the bakery on Garfield, and Destiny identified the contents by smell before she was within 10 feet. "The cinnamon ones," she demanded. "The cinnamon ones," he confirmed. She took the bag, looked inside with the concentrated assessment of someone verifying a delivery, and then wrapped both arms around his middle, with the complete conviction of a child who has decided something and considers ambiguity about it to be other people's problem. He hugged her back, his chin coming to rest briefly on top of her braids, and Jade stood a few feet away watching this, and felt something in her chest settle into a warmth that had no particular urgency to it. Just warmth, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. They found a spot under an oak tree and spread out the blanket Mark had brought, a real blanket, the kind you bring to parks, which Jade had teased him about when she saw him carrying it, because it suggested preparation she hadn't expected. Destiny ate her cinnamon roll in 4 bites, declared it the best thing she had ever eaten, which she said about most things she genuinely liked, and launched herself toward a group of kids she recognized from school before the last crumbs had settled. Mark and Jade sat together on the blanket in the October light. Around them, other families arranged themselves across the grass, unpacking food and settling children, and doing the ordinary domestic choreography of people who have somewhere comfortable to be. For the first time in a long time, Jade felt like she was inside this scene, rather than adjacent to it, not watching families be families, from the particular remove of someone who is managing rather than living. "She's going to win the relay race," Mark said. "She's been practicing the handoff," Jade said, "in the parking lot this morning. She made me time her." "How did she do?" "She told me the stopwatch app on my phone was probably inaccurate and that I should get a better phone." He laughed. She liked the sound of it, open and unguarded, the laugh of a person who is not performing being relaxed, but actually is. She had watched him learn to make that sound over the past year, or maybe to make it again, she wasn't sure which. They sat and watched Destiny work the field. She found her friend from school and began immediately explaining, with the authority of someone who has done extensive research, the proper technique for the relay race handoff. The friend listened with the attentiveness of someone who has learned that Destiny's explanations are worth following. Nearby, a father was teaching his son to throw a small football with more patience than results. 2 women sat in camp chairs, talking with the ease of people who have been having the same conversation for years and find it still interesting. An elderly man walked slowly along the edge of the grass with a child holding his hand, the child pulling slightly forward, the man letting himself be pulled. "My father would have liked this," Mark said. Jade looked at him. He was watching the elderly man and the child with an expression she recognized, the particular look of someone holding 2 times at once, the present moment and a memory laid over it. What would he have liked about it? She asked. Mark was quiet for a moment. The ordinariness of it, he said. He wasn't someone who needed things to be special. He liked the regular stuff. Saturday mornings, driving places, eating at the kitchen table. He paused. He died on a Wednesday afternoon, and I was at school doing long division, and I never got to say goodbye. For a long time, that was the thing I couldn't get past. Not that he was gone exactly, but that there was no last ordinary Wednesday that I knew was the last one. Jade put her hand over his on the blanket. He turned his hand and held it the way he had in the restaurant without looking at her, both of them watching the field. Destiny has been doing ordinary Wednesdays with you for almost a year, Jade said. Homework at the table, Thursdays at the store. You probably don't know which ones she's storing away. He looked at her. Neither do you, he said. That's the point, she said. You don't know in advance, you just show up. Destiny came sprinting back across the grass, slightly breathless, with the focused look of someone transitioning between phases of a plan. They're starting the relay race, she announced. Are you coming or not? They came. Mark ran the parent leg of the relay with the seriousness of someone who had understood the assignment, handing the baton to Destiny, with the crisp efficiency of a practiced handoff that they had in fact practiced in a parking lot that morning. They came in third, which Destiny assessed as the result of external factors outside their control and a useful data set for the following year. The three-legged race went better. Mark and Destiny tied their ankles together with the festival ribbon and made it to the finish line in second place, which Destiny accepted as an appropriate result, given that they had only been a three-legged unit for 15 minutes. A woman Jade didn't know stood near her during the three-legged race, watching Mark and Destiny navigate the course with the focused negotiation of two people who are discovering each other's rhythms. Is that your family? She asked. Jade looked at them. Mark was slowing his stride to match Destiny's, and Destiny was talking continuously, probably giving real-time tactical analysis, and Mark was nodding with what looked like genuine attention to the analysis, and they were both slightly off balance, and neither of them seemed to mind. Yes, Jade said, that's my family. At the end of the afternoon, when the ribbons had been given out and the volunteers were packing up, and the light was going long and gold, and the park was settling into its later Saturday quiet, Destiny came and stood in front of both of them on the blanket, with the expression she wore when she had decided something and was ready to act on it. She reached into the pocket of her blue dress and took out a small envelope sealed with a star sticker. She held it out to Mark. He took it carefully, the way you take something from a child with full attention. He opened it. Inside the envelope was a folded piece of paper, and folded into the paper were coins, and a bill worn soft from handling, $5.37. He looked up at Destiny. I saved it back up, she said. She was entirely serious the way she was about things that mattered to her. After Jade gave the other back. But I don't want to buy you anymore. You're already ours. As she pointed at the money in his hand. That's just so you remember where it started. So you always know. Mark looked at the money for a long moment. He looked at Jade, who had her hand pressed to her mouth and her eyes bright with something she wasn't trying to hide. He looked back at Destiny, who was watching him with the patient certainty of someone who has known how a story ends for some time and has simply been waiting for the rest of the people to catch up. He put the money carefully in his jacket pocket. Then he reached into his other pocket. I was going to do this at story time next Saturday, he said to Jade, but Destiny will tell you I have a problem with waiting too long to do things. She's not wrong, Jade said. She rarely is. He opened the small box. Inside was a ring, a gold band with a single stone, simple and honest, and not trying to be more than it was. He looked at Jade and said what he meant without dressing it up. You told me once that what you needed was to be treated like someone who could handle her own life. I want to spend the rest of mine watching you handle it, and being there when you want company, and asking instead of deciding. I want to be in the drawing. He paused. Jade, will you marry me? Destiny, standing beside them, had both hands clamped over her mouth and was vibrating with the effort of not saying anything, which was costing her considerably. Jade looked at the ring, looked at him, looked at Destiny, who appeared to be approximately 5 seconds from losing the battle with silence. You asked me this time, she said. I asked you, he said. Good, she said. Yes. Destiny removed both hands from her mouth and threw both arms straight up, and then threw herself at both of them with the full-body commitment of a child who has been waiting for this for a long time and intends to mark it appropriately. All three of them nearly went over on the October grass of Lincoln Park on the same Saturday as the Daddy and Me Festival, 1 year after a small girl in a faded flower dress had walked into a toy store with $5.37 and the absolute faith that if something was needed, you went and found it. They were married in November in Sullivan's Toy World on Garfield Avenue after hours with 40 people and string lights, and Betty from Romano's, who catered the whole thing and cried through the vows in a way that she would have firmly denied if asked about it afterward. Mrs. Peterson sat in the front row and dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief she had brought specifically for the occasion. Robert Thatcher, the attorney, stood near the back looking quietly pleased with himself in the way of someone whose paperwork helped make a good thing happen. Margaret Calloway attended and told Jade afterward, with the directness of someone who had run out of patience for circumlocution, that she had been wrong about several things which Jade accepted with more grace than it probably deserved. Destiny served as both flower girl and ring bearer, a dual appointment she had lobbied for, on the grounds that she was the reason any of this had happened and should therefore have a proportionate role in the ceremony. She walked down the aisle between the toy shelves with enormous dignity, scattering petals from a basket in her left hand and holding the ring box level in her right, her face the face of someone who is doing something important and knows it. When the officiant asked if anyone had objections, Destiny stood up. "I don't object," she said clearly. "I just want to say that this is the best idea anyone has ever had, and I knew it was going to happen and I am very glad it did." She sat back down. The room laughed, the kind of laugh that comes when something is both funny and exactly right. Mark's vows were simple. He said, "You showed me that showing up is the whole of it, not the problem solved or the grand gestures. Just showing up every ordinary day and choosing each other. I am choosing you. I am choosing Destiny. I am choosing this family we built out of $5.37 and a long time of learning for the rest of my life every ordinary Wednesday." Jade's vows were equally direct. She said, "You saw us when I didn't think we were visible, not as a project or a cause, but as people, as family. I spent a long time being afraid to want something. I am not afraid anymore. I choose you every complicated, imperfect, wonderful day." When it was done, and the ring was on, and the room erupted in sound, Destiny wrapped her arms around both of them and said into the noise with 7-year-old certainty, "I knew it. The whole time I knew it." And she had. Later, after the guests were gone and the lights were still up overhead, and Destiny was asleep in the back room on a pile of coats, Mark and Jade sat together on the floor of the reading corner, shoulder to shoulder, leaning against the shelves of picture books in the quiet of the closed store. Mark had the $5.37 in his hand. He'd taken it out and was just holding it, the way you hold something you don't want to put down. "What will you do with it?" Jade asked. "Keep it," he said. "Frame it. Put it somewhere I can see it every day." "Why?" He thought about the sealed door and what it had cost to keep it shut and what it had given back when it opened. He thought about a small girl with yellow ribbons and the unshakable faith that the right move when you needed something was to go find it and offer what you had. He thought about the difference between building things at a safe distance and building something you were actually inside, something that could hold you as much as you held it. "Because it's the most valuable thing I own," he said. Jade leaned her head against his shoulder. In the back room, Destiny slept with the deep and complete confidence of a child who knows where home is and has no doubt of its permanence. Outside, November settled over Garfield Avenue the way it does in cities. The particular quiet of a Friday night going late, the traffic thinning the lights of the buildings, holding steady against the dark. Inside the closed store, with its string lights still warm overhead, the three of them occupied the space that they had been, without knowing it, moving toward for a year. Not a perfect space. Not without the ordinary difficulties of lives lived close together, the adjustments and negotiations, and days that would require more than they had. But a chosen space. A real one, which as it turned out, was the only kind worth having. The James Sullivan Foundation completed its second year, having assisted 114 families. Destiny Washington Sullivan won the relay race at the Daddy and Me festival the following October. By a margin she described as significant. She was 8 years old and already talking about the one after that. A little girl walked into a store with $5.37 and walked out, having changed 2 lives forever. She didn't know it. She was just a child who needed something and went looking for it. That's all it took. Sometimes the smallest, most desperate act of hope is the thing that opens a door neither person knew was waiting. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that kindness given and kindness received can both change a life, leave a comment below. Has a small moment ever changed everything for you? Share it. And if this story is worth passing on, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.